Hello everyone, I'm Franke Pantoja, and today I'll be presenting to you my project on stress and mortality salience and its effect on death thought accessibility in undergraduate students. So a little background on what mortality salience is and where that term kind of comes from. It comes from terror management theory, which was done by a group of three researchers and psychologists that theorize that people are driven to live a significant and kind of fully accomplished life that will help you kind of avoid that thought of your death, like that impending doom where that's all you think about. And that's why we have our religions, our cultural worldviews, things that will help comprise our self-esteem that pretty much prevent us from always focusing on that impending last, second of our life. So those things that I just mentioned, like a cultural worldview and self-esteem, those comprise what researchers have found to be an anxiety buffer to death thought or mortality salience. Well, it has also been found that there is a disruption to this anxiety buffer system, and there's a theory on it called anxiety buffer disruption theory that states that if there's a overload of stress, then it can cause those buffer systems to break down and lead to stress disorders like PTSD. And in this graph here, it is shown from a study done by Vail and others that those with more post-traumatic stress symptoms have been shown to have an ineffective anxiety buffer system. So for my hypothesis, I hypothesize that students who score high in stress will present high levels of death thought accessibility, and those who score low in stress will present low levels of death thought accessibility. Unfortunately, I did have to do this project during the COVID-19 pandemic and the United States presidential election. So not many studies have done this at the time on terror management and death thought accessibility in the midst of a pandemic like this. So for my methods, I did a between subjects design. My participants were all between the ages of 18 and 22 years old. They, again, received this survey during a global pandemic and immediately after the United States presidential election, and were given no form of compensation whatsoever. So, in order to complete this, all participants need to have their own laptop or cell phone, and then they need to access Qualtrics through a survey that was sent out. And in the survey, I used the Holmes and Rahe social readjustment rating scale, the positive and negative effect schedule, and a death or neutral word stem task. So within this Qualtrics survey, a majority of it was the social readjustment scale and the positive and negative effect schedule, with a little bit being comprised of a writing prompt and the word stem task at the end. So to start the whole survey, participants had to look at an informed consent sheet and give consent to go through the survey. After that, they went through the social readjustment rating scale, and then after that, they were given a question asking when their birthday was, and if it was an odd or even day. If you had an odd birthday, you were given a death writing prompt. If you were given an even or you had an even birthday, you were given the dental writing prompt. So after that, you had to answer the positive and negative effect schedule questions, followed by reading a quick 3-minute piece of text and then finishing the survey off with a word stem task. And what was calculated was death thought accessibility, and this was calculated using an ANOVA test. So in the end, my results showed that death thought accessibility was actually higher in mortality salience with participants with low levels of stress than in those with high levels of stress. And there was two groups. There was a low stress group and a high stress group, and then there was two groups for the writing prompt, the death and the dental. And there was no significant difference between either sets of groups. So for the conclusions I came from my results in the entire study, I found that prompting the thought of death would not raise death thought accessibility in those with high levels of stress. Unfortunately, my hypothesis was not supported, and as well, my results did not align with the Vail study that I tried replicating. This may be due to because in the Vail study, the age difference for the participants was a lot greater. All the participants were screened for PTSD on their level of severity and how many symptoms they had. And they also used the self-affirmation test as a third independent variable, where I only had two, which was the stress levels and the writing group, or the writing prompt group that participants were in. Some of the limitations that came with this type of study is, as you should know, people that are or participants that are in a between subjects study, it's kind of hard to maintain homogeneity across the groups. People of different ages, backgrounds, religions come into this, so it's hard to maintain that. Again, something I've been kind of emphasizing is the big environmental factors were the pandemic and election that were going on during the administration and calculations of this research project. And I did not measure for any previous stress or anxiety disorders that could have affected the level of stress that participants had coming into this. So for some applications that can be taken from this is, it has been shown that there's been difficulty replicating terror management theory due to researchers not sticking to a pre-registered plan made by the three founding researchers of this theory. But even though it is hard to replicate, it can be seen and it is possible to help identify people who have a level of or different levels of stress disorders and finding the severity of those through this type of research, as well as seeing how events like the COVID-19 pandemic and the United States presidential election affect how much people think about their death, depending on how stressful these events are to some people. Thank you very much for watching this, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.